just kind of recapping, like, how did this webinar series come to be? So, you know, as a practice owner, I have a lot of conversations with young endodontists as they're starting to explore their opportunities and what they want to do following graduation. And I have largely found that there are not good questions being asked. And
Yeah.
so a lot of the conversations are, what file system do you use?
Yeah.
Which is, to me, just not a good quality question when you're trying to evaluate your career options. And
Right.
so I, in having many of these conversations, was like, you know what? There's like a gap in our knowledge. Residency programs in dental school in general are not strong with business education, practice management, like they fall very short. And that happens to be where my passion lies. And so I had enough of those conversations and I felt a little bit compelled to maybe try and fill in some of those gaps or voids. And so all of my topics, for the most part, are like very real world, real life, applicable to success in private practice, because ultimately that is the goal, of course. I have copies of all of the previous webinars if there's any particular topic, but we've talked about, compensation discussions, marketing, scheduling efficiency, core values and practice culture, all of that, which I think.
I've gone so some of the
Yeah.
times where you've had it, my schedule's just been kind of chaotic with a baby. So I've
Yeah.
gone back and watched some of the previous stuff
Oh, sweet.
just on my own time. So I couldn't kind of make it to the actual webinar, but I did catch some of it, and then I've been able to come to I think two other ones that you've put on. So I appreciate
Great.
that.
Yeah, of course. Well, it just kind of felt like I had something at least to offer based off of my experience, and so that's where this was born.
Sure.
And so this topic I think is incredibly relevant, right, to the marketplace in dentistry, and all it takes is going to a current AAE meeting to see that corporate dentistry is everywhere.
Oh yeah.
And they are largely in all residency programs. And so, this decision is going to have to come of what path and what environment do I want to find myself in after residency. So we're going to kind of talk about both sides of that equation. And as I said, I've only been on the one side. I've never been in corporate in any capacity. So, just so you know my background and where I come from. But in general, why does this decision matter? Why is it the most important thing, I think, in terms of choosing where your career wants to go is your first job really shapes a lot, I think, for your trajectory. So clinical confidence, I think everybody wants that. And I think that your environment has a big part of that. We're going to talk about mentorship. I think this is probably the king of all things. What environment are you going to get that mentorship? Income, of course, that matters a lot. Money matters. We can't say it doesn't. Your lifestyle, right? Balance and lifestyle. What does that look like? Days worked and hours and those kind of things. What's long-term career opportunities? And then I just want to clearly say that there's no universally right or wrong, right? So some people will be perfectly aligned with the private practice environment, others with corporate. And so we're going to kind of digest the differences. But it's not what's right, it's what's right for you. So the goal is alignment with the philosophy and the environment and not necessarily, you know, not right or wrong. So the current landscape of dentistry, so like there's a lot of consolidation, right? So the days of, you hang a shingle and you start practicing, those are becoming fewer and fewer. And so there's a lot of kind of these bigger DSO groups that are kind of, gobbling up some of those solo practices where maybe those doctors are not enjoying the practice management and the people management and the business aspect and, just really want to focus on clinical dentistry. So the corporate groups, there's a lot of aggressive recruiting. So there's, they're there and they're present and they have big teams in recruiting, staffing. So they certainly have a leg up to be able to be pervasive in getting in touch with people during their residencies. There is a general, lack of specialists entering the market compared to demand, which I know very well as a growing organization. There's only about 200 endodontists graduating annually in the country.
So endo is in decline. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that we aren't taking any more residents. Like so the programs have stayed the same size, and so we graduate the same amount of 200-ish every single year. But the demand for endo practices wanting endodontists, and
Yeah.
now we have to remember all these corporate groups like, if there's a general dentist that owns 10 locations, they want in-house endo now. So
Yeah.
like now we're competing in that space as well. So there's just not a lot of endodontists and a lot of demand.
Okay.
And so we're sought after more than ever before. I talk to my colleagues in every state and they're like, oh, yeah, we're trying to hire. We're trying to hire. Like everybody's trying to hire.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a good thing for you in that you're going to be able to, choose and select and be picky about where you end up. But it is a big frustration when you're on the hiring side. So just from a comparative, there's 250,000 general dentists in the country, and there's less than 7,000 endodontists in the country.
Oh wow, I didn't know that was the discrepancy was so big.
Yeah, very big. So, it's just a tiny market and we're sought after, which is fantastic. But just tiny, tiny numbers.
Yeah.
It's a little puddle. Obviously, student debt influences a lot of early decisions for people, and some corporate groups can, contribute to loan repayment and stuff like that. So that's a consideration for a lot of doctors. And then in terms of priorities, younger doctors are like, I want good lifestyle, I want mentorship, I want some flexibility, I want growth opportunities. And so, sometimes there's a pressure to make a fast decision before kind of digesting full scope of the different opportunities. And so I think it's fantastic that you're listening to and thinking about things before you even get into residency because the pressure of starting to make decisions comes really right after year one. And so it comes,
This was all, yeah, this is all kind of what because I practiced general dentistry for 5 years
yep,
and for a long time never really even considered going back to school until
yeah,
stars aligned. And really what it was that my private practice, I was on track to becoming potentially a partnership deal. And then it
okay,
kind of imploded after looking at different options and it just didn't make sense. And it wasn't gonna, we weren't burning bridges or anything, but it was like, okay, this isn't going to make sense. Now I'm going to look for my next option. And then I thought, well, I've always loved endo and I've thought about the idea of it, but I never really thought it would be a reality. I didn't think anything would be feasible with that. And then I talked to my wife and said, what do you think about me going back to school? And she said, look, if that's what you want to do and it makes you happy, I'd say go for it. The only thing
yeah.
is that she said, but the only school you can apply to is MUSC because we have a baby and yeah, she wanted to be near family with that. So I was like, all right,
Yeah.
all eggs in one basket. Let's hope that it works.
I mean, no pressure there.
Yeah, right. So, but fortunately, it all worked out nicely. So
I love
yeah,
it.
I've been back and forth, especially at the time on private practice versus corporate general dentistry, and I just never really wanted to do corporate general dentistry ever. I've
Yeah.
heard all the horror stories that came from it. So, but I know if I've spoken with residents and stuff about corporate endo as
Mhm.
well, and kind of what that looks like and the pros and cons of it too.
Absolutely. Well, you're a wise man to be kind of digesting everything. I was in a similar position where I was a GP for 5 years, but in a Navy environment.
Okay.
And I will say those years as a general dentist, I think were invaluable to being a really strong specialist.
Oh, I completely agree.
So you're gonna have, super leg up. I mean, you're gonna be strong and you're going to enter private practice with so much historical knowledge. So you're going to be in a really strong position. That's awesome.
Good to know.
All right, so let's talk and digest the two models. So we'll call it private practice, corporate dentistry. So private practice, and a lot of this is going to be familiar to you, but it's a doctor-led environment, tend to have smaller teams, often very relationship driven, right? So your referrals are all, people that you have strong relationships with that you continue to foster and strengthen over time. The autonomy is yours, right? So you are making the decisions. You're not having anyone give you any particular guidance. And then, of course, there is traditional ownership opportunities often available in a private practice environment. So some of the advantages, I would say, is closer mentorship. Now, that is, I would say, practice specific. So there are some doctors like myself that really love mentorship and create a very clear onboarding plan for doctors and a mentorship like pathway for their doctors. And then there are other doctors that are going to throw you in and expect you to just kind of sink or swim. And so not everybody's cut out for mentorship. So I wouldn't necessarily say private practice has better overall mentorship, but I would say traditionally you have a much closer working relationship in private practice versus corporate. Sometimes there's a clinical dental director or something. So there's like a doctor in charge of mentorship, but they're usually not in your space. They're not in your particular environment. They're someone you have access to, but not directly. Usually there's, a lot of clinical freedom. You can talk about materials and supplies and those kind of things. And so there's a little bit more wiggle room. I do think referral relationships they're the most important part of a strong, productive practice. And so I think referral relationships, if you're joining a well-established practice, you're going to be able to join a practice that already has a strong foundation for your schedule to thrive on. I think culture is a very big thing. And so to have like direct leadership often results in a nice personal culture where every team member truly impacts it and you don't feel like your leadership team is um, just like not present physically. So I think that that certainly matters. And then, of course, we talked a little bit about, clearer pathways to equity and ownership. Some challenges, so systems probably vary significantly, right? So some practices have very concrete, clear systems and strong operations, which I think is probably one of the hardest things to achieve in practice. And so, some practices recognize the value in that and have invested time, energy, leadership, such as Amanda, like the people who can make that happen. And then other offices, it's a little chaotic and not very clearly documented. So systems can definitely vary. I would say probably most private practices don't have a super structured onboarding. They welcome the doctor, you sign, here's start day, and I don't know that there's like a plan of like this is week one, this is month one, this is quarter one, like what are we trying to achieve? I don't get the sense that that's super typical. Sometimes there is a ramp up of income, a little bit slower. I think a very important conversation to have if you're joining a private practice is, what is the schedule management, right? So some people are like, oh yeah, I want an associate, but there is sometimes the expectation that you as the associate are going to be in charge of building your schedule, right?
That's how it was for me in private practice. I came on with a guy who had it was his father started the practice 40 something years prior, and then it was
Yep.
his dad working, and then his dad kind of passed away unexpectedly, and he took over fully, and he was like that super solo
Yep.
doctor where he was
Yeah.
doing running around kind of chicken with his head cut off sort of thing, just kind of burning at both ends.
Yeah.
And that's when he looked for an associate, me, and I came in and he was like, I'm not giving you my patience. It's going to be an organic growth. And
Yeah.
I looked at it as the long term model. So like I thought maybe I'll be there forever, and I got to just build my own book. So it was just what you were talking about. Started really slow. Didn't
Hmm.
even really pick up until I was considering leaving in like the last year, which was
Wow.
very frustrating to sit there for 5 years. Some years were better than others, but when he figured out that I wasn't going to stay, he kind of just gave up on me. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of times doctors aren't even like really hiring an associate based off of like a true study of the practice. What are the needs of the practice? How are we going to support that doctor? Like a lot of times it's just like an emotional decision. They're like, I want an associate. Well, I mean, you really have to know your numbers and your referral patterns. Like you need to know if that person can be supported. So I think sometimes there's some oversight in those hiring decisions. And I have taken a very different perspective on how to launch my associates, in that a busy associate is a happy associate.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So I actually sacrifice my personal schedule all the time for their schedule.
Which is what I would think as an owner you should be doing more than likely. And I talked with my office manager about this until my I was blue in the face because
Yeah.
she was like she had been in dentistry for 30 something years. So she was like, that's how it should be, but he just wasn't doing it. So it
Hmm.
was some days I would come in year 3 or 4 with very little to do, but he's got two fully stacked columns. And I'm sitting there like, what am I doing here? You know,
Yeah.
what's the reason for me even being here? Aren't you supposed to, am I supposed to be making money for the practice, or am I here for moral support for your schedule?
Yeah. That's very frustrating. Well,
Yeah,
and I think a lot of owners are like, if I produce, way more money for me to not have to pay an associate. So like from a math equation, I see what they're thinking.
yeah,
But if you don't have a busy associate, you don't have a happy associate and you don't have someone long term. And for
yeah,
me, like my relationships I've built blood, sweat, and tears building those, right? And so if I'm going to let someone into my inner circle and have an associate Dr. Joy, and I want that to be a long-term fit because if I'm promoting you to my referral community and you're gone in a year, like that's a poor reflection on me, right?
yeah,
So I think that yes, sometimes people hire doctors and they haven't done their due diligence of do they really need it? How does this look? How can I ensure that they're going to be successful in our practice?
yeah.
So if you've had that experience, you're going to be very keenly aware of, looking out for that, which I think
Yeah, all
great.
too intimately. I've had that exact experience. So
Ah,
I know a lot of the questions that I will be asking
yay.
into into future occupation.
I love it. Some private practices are just really outdated operationally, right? So like, systems and processes need to be changed. And if they're doing the same thing that they did 10 years ago, that's not how this works. Like every system needs to be reviewed and revamped and improved. So sometimes private practices have just been like for 30 years doing something the same way, which doesn't certainly make it right. The corporate dentistry model, so some typical characteristics, of course, they tend to be larger organizations. They're usually are comprised of multiple locations. They do typically have the strength of lots of structured systems and processes. So lots of that has been documented, and so that's quite clear in those environments. They have some centralized support, so you kind of have all your leadership and all of kind of those supporting people, team members are centralized. So whether that's good or bad, I don't know. Advantages we have, traditionally they can give you higher initial guarantees. So if you're going to start out slow, but I can give you a daily rate of whatever, 1,300 a day or whatever that might be. Sometimes they can dangle some higher salary incentives at the beginning. There does tend to be like more people in the hierarchy of the organization, so there's more administrative support. Like there's probably a defined HR person and a defined, culture leader. Like they might have people in different roles, so that might equate to more support for you. They do typically have an onboarding plan, which I think everybody should have, but I think that they recognize the importance of that, especially since they are larger, multiple locations. They want it to be consistent. There's usually a nice, clear structure for new grads. So they've thought through the career path, right? So in private practice, I think I've never spoken to another endodontist like myself that has thought through a career trajectory for their associates. You talk about like, okay, what percentage, collections or production? Like that's the only conversation that's had, but no one's talking about, okay, well, what about 2 years down the road, 5 years, 10 years? What does that look like? How can I grow with the organization? And I think that a lot of these corporate groups have spent a lot of time to create a path. And I think people really like that. They want to know what's their potential over the long term with their organization. So I do think they do that well. There potentially could be less operational stress. I think there's, maybe it'll be in my next slide for disadvantages, but like, you traditionally don't have the say of who to hire and who to fire. And, those decisions are traditionally made for you. And so, if you don't like a team member or somebody's just not working out, like that can create a lot of stress because you don't have that direct decision-making capability. But if you're just like not somebody that likes operations in any regard and you're like, I just want to be in a tooth and I don't want to deal with all that, then usually they do carry the burden of that. So some challenges, potentially less autonomy, right? Like there could be like, these are the materials that we use, these are the files, these are the systems, this is, how we consult every patient. Like there might be a little bit more of a, we expect you to conform to a particular system. Um, in some environments, they do want you to produce, right? Like that it's an organization, it's a business. So sometimes there's some production goals, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes there might be a little more pressure. I think you, as an individual doctor provider, probably have less influence over the overall culture of the organization. I think mentorship, going back to how important that is, I think it's incredibly variable. All of these organizations are going to say, of course we have mentorship. Of course we do, right? Like
Sure.
you're going to have this guy, this person, this is going to be great. And then, you show up and what's your access to that person and how often you're meeting and is it structured? I see this a ton. I do a lot of doctor lunches and I see these young docs that join these corporate entities and I have a lunch with them and they were promised the moon, right? Like, oh, I'm going to have somebody in office. And then they are literally thrown into their own office and they graduated a month ago, right? So
Yeah.
that's stressful.
Yeah.
So, they will promise mentorship. And I think, asking the questions and talking to other doctors in the organization to really see what that's about, I think would be incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I
And
was
then,
promised
yeah,
mentorship. I was promised mentorship too, and that never really
yeah,
panned out
didn't
much.
pan out. I
Yeah.
mean, so you should be like, okay, well, what does that look like? What is the mentorship plan? What is onboarding? Like, those are
I
questions
mean,
that most,
in the end, my boss even said, and I never thought he would admit it, but he even said, I probably could have done a better job mentoring you. And I was
mm,
like, yeah, you really could have. So I learned everything on my own for the most part. But
that's
it's I learned it well, I guess.
Well, that's right. And in the next stage of your career, you're going to have a very different decision-making process.
Sure.
So we learn way more from challenging situations than the easy ones.
Yeah.
So, um, of course, the whole equity thing, right? Like they dangle the carrots, and it's, like if the company, like, if it's private equity and there's, it gets to be a very convoluted equation sometimes of like, what do you truly have for equity and when does that come into play? So, sometimes there's some very big appealing promises on the front end of these organizations. I don't know. I haven't had a friend in one of these endo corporate groups that has ever had the equity. What do they call that, Amanda? When they have to recap, when they get all the
Oh
money
yeah.
in the world. I don't know anyone who's had that yet. So I don't know. I don't know
Me
where the
neither.
recap lives. You either?
What is that? Wait,
I
what
mean,
is a what
I've been
is
through a recap and it just
what's a recap?
Yeah,
so
Amanda.
recap it actually stands for recapitalization. So essentially like you have an investor that invests this money into the company and says like, okay, we'll do this for 5 years and the company says, oh, with your money we'll grow 10x. And then at the end of 5 years, they're like, okay, we want our 10x.
Yeah.
And you largely have to make that happen by selling the company off to a new private equity firm essentially. And at that point, right, like you get equity at a certain price and you're supposed to see the gains of that. But largely, like in my organization, the gains that I was in previously, we hit our first recap, the gains weren't seen. And then, like, depending on where you are in what's called the waterfall, you got nothing.
Uh,
So, like, I was a PIU unit holder and they like have to pay all the actual shareholders first.
yeah.
So they show this big picture of like in 5 years, it could be worth, right, like retirement money. And you're
Yeah.
Yeah.
like, wow, I'm going to stick it out. And then you get there and they're like, yeah, actually, it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
And
It's
that
all
was my,
projections. It's
Yes.
projections. Yeah.
yeah, everything is a projection based on, kind of what looks good on paper.
That's
Um,
that when I looked at the partnership opportunities, it was all projections. Well, we could be worth $50 million one day. And I was like,
yeah.
what? Where are
We
you getting
estimate in
these
five
numbers?
years we're going to be worth 12x. And
Yeah.
that's what this means for you. You
Yeah.
just have
Right.
to help us get to 12x. That's what
Right.
happens.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And I mean, it's not all bad intention, but and the bigger the ship gets, the harder it is to impact that 12x. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of times these corporate groups, like, they put together these packages, right, where they're kind of showing you the potential, right? And the potential is, you know, only that, a potential, right? So the reality of that happening. And so I'm not saying they're being deceitful or, whatnot, but a lot of times there's a little fluff, in that
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah.
and I
in that
mean,
equation.
you can't predict things like, you know what I mean? Like the organization I was with opened in 2016, and before the first recap, we had COVID.
Mm,
Like, you
That's
know what I mean? You can never predict that stuff. Like the cost of debt went up, the cost of everything went up. So it's like the market changes and like you just can't. Sure, like if it continued at the exact trajectory as it was today, it might be worth 12x, but you
if
can't predict all of
everything
that stuff.
works perfectly.
yes,
See
That's
that?
right.
yes,
We often spend a lot of time talking about making sure we don't overpromise and underdeliver. You're supposed
Yeah,
to underpromise and overdeliver.
yeah,
It was a struggle for the
yeah,
8 years I was there.
yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
yes. All right. So what are some things that residents potentially get wrong? I would say like everybody's just obsessed with 40%, 45%, like whatever that number is, like that is all they see. Like that is just like the decision. They're like, oh, well, they're going to give me 45% versus 42%. Like that's all that their brain can function on. But I will say that it's way more than that number. Other things that they should be considering is not evaluating the true mentorship. I'm telling you, I think that this is like the most impactful thing, and they don't recognize the value of it. So the first 2 to 3 years, like I firmly believe in increasing the capacity of my associates. And so most associates come out like doing 4 cases. That's probably kind of maybe the standard from school. And I have a very clear way and path of teaching them how to go from 4 to 5 to 6 to 7. And so I've done that repeated. And I don't know if you know, but the vast majority of endodontists in the entire country do 3 to 5 cases a day.
I was kind of curious about that because I've heard a variety of different things, and some people are, just burning it and they'll do as much as they possibly
Yeah.
can. And then some are like, oh, I just kind of like to kind of take my time and do two in the morning, two in the afternoon, something like that. So I've
Right.
never really been, no one's ever really told me, I guess, on what's the average, what is it, what's normal, I guess, for a working day for an endodontist.
I do believe it's 3 to 5 cases per day is probably the vast majority of endodontists. So you're of course going to have those like people that crank and do like 12 a day, which is, it's a lot. And then there are going to be the ones that two-step everything. So it really averages out to like 2 to 3 a day. And, so there is the gamut. But, if you have the goals of being efficient, productive, like those are questions to ask of like, how can you help me get to my goal of 7 cases, 8 cases a day? And I think it's very predictably achievable if you have someone who's been there and done that and kind of can show you their system and process. But if you're going to join a practice where that owner for 20 years has been doing 3 to 5 a day, like they don't have the skill set to teach you,
Right.
that. So I think understanding, their philosophy, of course, and all of that to make sure that you're going to be in an environment where if you have specific goals you want to meet, that it will be supported in that
And
environment.
and this would be like 3 to 5 endo cases, not 3 to 5 that would also include consults, right?
No, 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 treatments.
Treatments. Okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, I invite all of the MUSC residents. So you are officially one. Like, I would love for you to come shadow because those days, I've had a lot of them come shadow. Those days are incredibly impactful for you to see the flow of like, how is case by case consult, like, how's the day run? And I mean, I do 7 to 8 a day with, I don't know, 7 to 100 consults. I don't know. It depends on the day, but it's not stressful. It's
Yeah,
not.
and so for when I started to buckle in and think like, all right, I'm really interested in doing endo. I want to make this a reality. I reached out to every endodontist in the area in Charlotte and Rock
Yeah.
Hill and Fort Mill, and just told them who I am, what's my story, in a short email,
Yeah.
and that I'm interested in shadowing. That's just it. I mean, there was a piece of it that was looking obviously for some recommendation letters and stuff, but it was truly like I've never spent much time in an
Yeah.
endodontist office. I want to see what the day to day is. And only one lady answered back to me. Her name is, well, no, I'm sorry. One guy did. And then he said, yeah, sure. And then he never reached back out to like let me come in to him. I talked to him on the phone and he just never really got back to me. But I
Yeah.
spent probably, I mean, close to a year shadowing Dr. Katie Kickerts in South Park and on
Mm.
Fridays. And so I actually got to see, she was doing a half day from 8 till 1, I think, on Fridays. But I mean, I was working Monday through Thursday for the most part and every other Friday. But it was
Yep.
really, I mean, it was cool to be able to see. She was pretty quick. She was efficient. She was really good at it, but she would kind of bounce around and be doing consults and kind of jumping in. And
Mm.
most of the time, she would start and finish a case if feasible, if there wasn't a giant lesion or something on it.
Yep.
But it was good to see that like hands on and get a real perspective for it.
Absolutely. And I think it's some of the most valuable time you can spend. And I know Dr. Cotter at MUSC, he does, give specific time allotment for the residents to go and do that because I just think it's a really impactful day. Because there's residency world and then there's real world, you know?
Yeah,
So like,
yeah, right,
I
right,
mean,
right.
there's a little difference of like, yes, I know there's a textbook answer, but then there's also like a paying patient on the other side of some situations of so sometimes there are different approaches in
If
private practice
it's
to certain things.
if it's anything like dental school world versus private practice world,
Yeah.
I know all too well what you're
Yes,
talking about.
exactly. Yes. I think something that residents sometimes are like, they think culture is fluffy. Like they think like, leadership culture, like team happiness, like they don't see the importance of that.
Oh no,
So asking about turnover and, how long has Susie been with the practice and, those kind of things. I'm telling you, like your team is everything. Like your
yeah,
greatest resource are your people. And
100.
so if you are practicing in an environment where they're just churning and burning through team members, like that's very stressful for you. And that slows you down because then you're having to kind of help onboard or train a new assistant. Like, so culture, I wish it weren't kind of perceived as maybe not that valuable because I think it's top tier for sure.
Oh, I think culture is pretty much almost everything. With a
Yes.
really solid culture, solid team, I mean, you can do anything. You can make anything happen. Same day
Yes.
treatments happen. But
Yes.
when you start to get that toxicity in there, it
That's
just
right.
it's an uphill battle for the provider to get the team on board to doing what needs to be done.
Yes. But like how much are we exposed to like people talking about the value of that? I
Never.
actually I've spoken at the AAE the last couple years. This past year, I had submitted a topic on the value of leadership
Yeah.
and basically culture in the success of a practice, and it wasn't accepted. It wasn't
Oh, that's a
you know,
shame.
but it just goes to show if I had, suggested a title on cytokines and inflammation, I would have been in, right?
Yeah.
So I think part of it is like this isn't widely adopted by some of the, leaders in our organization.
Yeah.
So anywho, my little soapbox. But focusing only on short-term lifestyle. So sometimes, people are just like, what's convenient today, but not looking at big picture or big goals down the road. And then like the biggest thing, like just ask the question, right? Like that's how we learn. And if you're not asking questions, you're not fully evaluating your opportunities. And so sometimes people are very reserved in these conversations, or when it starts to be like negotiation of contracts, people get hesitant, but it's appropriate to ask questions politely and professionally, because for the sake of not asking the question, like then you could join something and be like, oh, well, this wasn't what I thought. And if you had just asked a few more questions up front, you might have had a better insight. So, what are some questions that I think that you should ask before accepting any position? I could harp on this all day, but who will mentor me? How accessible are they? If you have something that doesn't go right, because this will inevitably happen, like how are complications? How are unhappy patients? How are, an upset referring doctor. Like, how are those things handled in the practice? I think that's really important to be talked about ahead of time because it's not if it happens, it's when it happens and what kind of support will you get in those types of situations. Um, is there a documented mentorship plan that we can review together? What does this look like? What is my first year, my first 2 years? We built out the first 2 years of a mentorship program because I think it takes all of that. I mean, really, private practice after residency is like a residency after a residency, right? It's just a different type. So, what does that look like? And what should I expect to learn in the organization over a specific period of time? And then we already talked about this. It's offered, but is it really there and is it intentional? Clinical philosophy, I think if you're going to join a private practice, I think having that conversation with the doctor of like, are you a one visit person or a two visit person? And I think that this is a really relevant question because people feel very passionate about this, right? Like one side or the other. And so I think, if you're going to be a one visit guy and you join a guy who's been doing two visits for 30 years, like, is that going to be a source of conflict? Is he going to think that you're not, providing appropriate care? And, is it a source of contention? I will say, like, in my practice, I'm very one visit. I believe the literature, I believe the outcomes. So, why patients don't want to see us once? They sure don't want to see us twice. If when appropriate, I do one visit all the time. And so I personally probably wouldn't want to onboard an associate that intends to do two visits forever because that's just not really aligned with my philosophy or, the goals of the practice. Technology is a big deal, right? I mean, there are still practices that don't have cone beam in the practice or aren't using it as frequently as I believe we should be using it. And so having an idea of being on the same page with technology, are they a big laser person? Are they a big gentle wave? Like, being on the same page with those technology decisions, I think is pretty important. And some people are big, like, we are laser people and you will use the laser. And like, are you okay and happy to do that? Or does that not feel right for how you want to practice? So I think those are important questions. Treatment planning decisions, I think like that's really relevant to too. It's like, are we going to be on the same page with how we recommend treatment and the decisions we make from a treatment standpoint? Because I certainly don't want to have an associate where I would recommend A and every time they recommend B, right? Like then we're not aligned. And so then if a referring doctor refers to my practice, like the answer they get is depending upon who they see, right? I want all of my doctors to kind of be like similar philosophy and similar recommendations. And so I do think, are you going to join a practice where cracked teeth are worth saving? Is that the opinion, right? Are they believing in that we should be investing in saving these teeth because the studies say we should? Or are they just like, no, no, cracked teeth, I recommend extraction? Like, I think those types of decisions should be talked about because they can certainly be sources of conflict if they're not spoken of ahead of time. So compensation's a big deal, right? Like, are you being paid on collection versus production? If you're being paid on collection, how are the collections for that practice? What percentage of collection do they really have? If they're
Right.
very, very hesitant to maybe show you some reports and some numbers, like that's a little concerning, right? Because everyone can say they're 98% collection, but is that supported by their true practice numbers? And like for me, I'm like, I got nothing to hide, right? So like if you want to see something, I'm going to show it to you because I feel confident in our organization. But if you start to have some of these conversations and there's some hesitancy to share some relevant information, then we have to maybe ask why.
They're not necessarily obligated to show you that stuff, are they?
No, I mean, you can show and not show what you want, but
Yeah.
No, but the competitive landscape right now for doctors, it is in your favor. When I lived in that world, if a doctor asked, I was pulling reports like immediately.
mhm.
Yeah, because if you are looking a little bit shady, then they'll just look elsewhere.
Oh yeah, they'll keep it
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not obligated, but if it's a strong practice and they have nothing to hide, right? And they're proud of their numbers, then why wouldn't they show you?
Right.
Um, and then production, right? So obviously it's compensation based off of adjusted production if they happen to enroll with insurances. But of course, that's a big conversation in and of itself. How do you select an insurance participation? What percentage of your fee schedule? Like you want to make sure that you're not joining a practice where they're signed up with every insurance under the sun and you're getting paid, the fee for molar endo is like $700. Like, right? You got to make sure that you're joining a practice that's not like a Medicaid clinic or churning and burning and you have to do 10 to equal what you would make in a different structured practice doing 5, right? So it's important to know all of that. So compensation is not just a percentage of those things. It's also like, are you going to get maybe a CE stipend, or do they encourage you to go to CE events? Are there benefits, right? So do they offer health insurance? A lot of practices don't. Private practices don't. Some of the bigger groups tend to, right? So that can be a distinguishing factor. We do offer it in our practice, but it's not super common across the landscape. Do they have a 401k plan, right? That's a big deal as you're planning your future. Do they have a plan that you can participate in? Is there any daily guarantee structure? Are they willing to do a sign-on bonus, or if you're having to move, a relocation bonus, right? So that when we talk compensation, that's why like getting like tunnel visioned on a number, it's all of these things that really are telling you like how will you be compensated with that organization. So don't overlook all these other benefits to consider. We talked a little bit about schedule, but I think schedule is important. How many days are you expected to work? Some practices want you 5 days, some it's 4. What does that look like? How does that jive with your family and your personal goals? Is there an expected case volume on a regular basis? Talking about that up front, I think is important. Do you have to travel between locations? Are you going to be, set at one particular location, or are you going to have to bebop to different offices and different team members, different assistants? Like all of that's incredibly relevant. And then just like work-life balance, or some practices have different hours where they're open later or earlier, right? So like if you have young children, are you okay working till 7? That's probably not going to be your preferred, hours.
Right.
At our practice, we're 8 to 5, but we do a pretty awesome schedule wherein the doctor will work Monday through Thursday one week and then Tuesday through Friday the next week and continue to alternate that. So then you get a 2-day weekend and a 4-day weekend and a 2-day weekend and a 4-day weekend. And it's just really nice because if you want to like, take a little trip or something, like you have a little bit more time, I think it helps everybody refresh and recharge on those longer weekends. And then, in our practice, we have like in Somerville, we have the 2 offices. So the 2 offices just have the flip schedule. So we're still open as a practice Monday through Friday, but the doctors are only working 4 days a week.
I see.
And yeah, did you have a question?
Oh, no, no, no. I see. I
Oh,
see. Yeah.
yeah. And then we don't take a lunch. We like to just churn and burn and like have a very, continuous day. For me, I can't stop because then I get tired. So if you work through lunch, then it's really like working 4.5 days because you don't take that hour lunch. So that's what works best for us. But, good questions asked. If you're one of those people that's just like, I absolutely need a lunch, like, these are all little things that you want to talk about with a practice ahead of time. Hey, Jason, welcome.
Hi, I'm
Happy to have
sorry.
you.
Good. I think I got mixed up on the East Coast time differential, so
Oh, no
I
worries.
thought I was early. Now I'm late.
Ah,
Sorry, my
hey, you're
bad.
totally fine. We're gonna have, of course, we have it's all recorded. So we'll send it to you and you
Yes,
can just hop on to what you missed. Um,
perfect.
so
Thank
we're
you.
comparing some corporate versus private practice. Right now, we're talking about things that we should ask about before we're deciding where we want to take a job offer. So growth opportunities, like what are the leadership opportunities, right? Like if you're somebody that wants to grow within the organization, wants to have an impact on culture, like will you have that opportunity? So what does that look like from a leadership standpoint? If you are interested in ownership. Like what is the pathway to that? How do I get to that? What's the timeline? What are going to be equity, potential in the organization? So those are, really great questions to have in the early stages because there are going to be some owners that are very open to those conversations and some that are maybe just like, no, I'm not interested in that. And of course, you want to make sure you're aligned based off of what your preferences will be. And then I think long-term vision, right? Like you should be able to talk to a doctor and really, what is their vision for the practice? 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Like how do they, what's their mission, their vision? What are they passionate about? Like, and if they can't express that, then how do you know if you're aligned with that, right? So like, what is the why of their practice and where do they see it in the coming years? So I think some practices don't really think beyond kind of the day to day, and I think it's important to have a long-term vision that you can see yourself aligned with. We've touched on culture, but team turnover, just huge, right? If they are just not retaining team members, that's not a strong reflection on the culture. What's the communication style in the practice? I think everybody in life struggles with communication, but within an organization, if there's not a clear team hierarchy of who do you go to for this or that, if there's not continuous communication, it does add to the stress of the environment. So understanding their communication styles, I think, very important. Core values, right? So like being able to ask an owner of like, well, what are the core values of your organization? If they don't have core values, I'm alarmed, right? But like they should be able to just tell you, right? So like we can say ours is communication, ownership, future focus, excellence, commitment. Like I should be able to rattle those off because in essence, we're living those every day. So if you are having conversations and people don't have a vision, they don't have a core value, like to me, like, well, how do we know if we're aligned if you haven't even figured out what matters to you yet as a company? So I think those are important things to explore. Support systems, right? Like who's in charge of what department and where do we go to help and support one another? I think it's important to know like who you turn to for HR things and who you turn to for conflicts. And like I think sometimes those systems aren't very clearly defined or outlined for new doctors. So I think that's incredibly relevant. What might be some red flags to look for? And we're going to look on both sides of the equation. But, sometimes corporate environments have, some production pressure. Of course, they're going to maybe tell you there's none, but it's a business and they have lots of numbers to meet. And so, there will be some in some regard, potentially. Corporate offices sometimes have higher turnover of supporting team members. So, it's a very different structure. I mean, we see it with our GP referrals. The corporate entities tend to have like just a lot of turnover. And so like we coached up their front desk and they knew how to refer to us and then Susie's gone. And so now it's Hannah. So now we're going to teach Hannah how to do it, right? So we see it just from being on the other side of the GP world. And so I can't imagine that's entirely different, but there does tend to be a little bit more turnover in those environments. Sometimes the mentorship is not tangible or accessible when you need it, right? So you're in practice and something's happening right now, like who's there to help me and how. Sometimes there's, they like to be open on weekends or they like the extended hours or, they want 5 days out of you or whatever that might be. So sometimes the schedule is a little bit more demanding. But in private practice, we have our own red flags. I mean, sometimes there are just no systems. Like if you ask a practice, where could I see your documented protocols? Like, and if they look at you just like, what are we talking about? Like, then that means there aren't any documented systems. And how do we operate efficiently? So sometimes private practice is not great at defining systems. I do think sometimes poor communication. Of course, I feel like we could look at this and say like it could happen in both environments. So I think that's very valid, of course. But at least, in the corporate environment, they have a very clear team hierarchy and structure. And I think sometimes they have communication systems that are more thought through. Sometimes it could be sink or swim, right? They just, like in your previous opportunity, Spencer, it was just like, well, here you are, like, good luck. And there wasn't the mentality of like trying to coach you or mentor you to be a stronger clinician. And then a lot of times there's really no clear growth path. So if you ask these companies of like, what does 5 years look like for me? A lot of times they haven't really thought about that. So I think these are all things that are worthy of discussion ahead of time. So what are maybe some things that actually do predict long-term success? I know this feels redundant, but like it's so important that I think it's worth saying again. But mentorship, emotional intelligence, like I don't think this could be understated. Amanda will agree with me. But like, the emotional intelligence of the owner or whoever you're going to interact with a lot, like, are they somebody who can understand your needs, be empathetic to your needs, care about your needs? Just like we need to have EI when we're interacting with patients. I think being in an environment where you have leadership that really can gauge like how you're feeling and what your stressors are, I think it's really important to join with a leader who exemplifies emotional intelligence. I think strong communication skills cannot be understated. Like, I think this is very, very important. Consistency is huge, right? So, like, if I, as a leader, show up and I'm grouchy and moody on Monday and all, flustered, and then on Tuesday I show up and I'm sweet as pie and I'm kind and all of this, like your team doesn't know what to expect from that. Like, you don't know what you're getting, and so you want to make sure you're joining a practice or an organization where there's consistency, whether it's demeanor of leadership, whether it's like, this is how we handle complaints, this is how we handle nervous patients, like whatever it might be. Like, there should be a lot of consistency in the day to day, because then everybody knows what to expect. And I think consistency equals trust. And so if you're joining an environment that is very consistent, it's a trustworthy environment, it's a stable environment. Having a little clinical humility, like endo's hard, right? So there's going to be great cases, there are going to be very challenging cases. And I think like being able to be in an environment where, the perfection isn't expected, but certainly growth is always expected. So if we have a case that didn't turn out the way we hoped or wanted, like, okay, what did we learn from that? What would we potentially do different in a similar situation next time? And recognizing that it's an opportunity for growth. So it's not an opportunity to rain down on you because a perforation happened or whatever, but it's like, well, okay, what did we learn from that? How do we communicate it well so that we're handling the situation as best as possible? But, joining a practice where they are, you're a new endodontist. And so perfection, not expected, right? And so knowing how that practice would handle some of those situations, I think is really important. Relationship building can't be understated in terms of referral relationships, but also within the organization, right? Like, are they investing in you and strengthening you as a person and a clinician? Adaptability, we have to be adaptable. Just because, we thought our schedule looked like this today, we always joke like our morning huddle, the schedule looks like A. And then if you put it next to the end of the day schedule, like they're not the same and they never are. So you have to be adaptable and flexible. And so the best environment is one that helps you become the doctor you want to be, right? So give some thought as to like, these are the most important things to me. Sometimes people don't even do that self exercise of like just sitting down with a piece of paper, what matters most to me in a practice environment before they start having the job questions or interviews. Because it's like, you need to know. You need to know what matters most to you so that you're making sure you're aligning with that. So some final takeaways. I mean, don't rush the decision, right? So I think that you should start to have conversations very early in your residency. I think I equate it to dating, which maybe isn't the best analogy because it's a boss doctor, relationship. So maybe we shouldn't be talking about dating. But I mean, it is, right? Like you need to get to know the person. It's not going to be one phone call. It's not going to be one dinner. It's like a series of time spent with that person. It is phone calls, Zoom calls, maybe dinners, visiting the practice a few times, talking to other associates, interacting with their team. Like, there needs to be a lot of interaction before you're deciding if that's right for you. Because, everybody can put on a good smile and have a good conversation, but you really need to see it from different angles before you're making the decision. And so, therefore, you shouldn't be like starting the conversations in March of your second year. Like, you need to foster those relationships, I think, early on. And so making sure that you're thinking about opportunities early enough so that you're giving it enough focus and attention before you make a decision. And you for sure are interviewing the practice as much as they're interviewing you. So it is a two-way street and conversation, especially in the market like we talked about where it is competitive. You should absolutely recognize that you're not compelled to take any, position. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and you should be looking for exactly what you want and ask the questions because you will find out if you ask the right questions. And in that vein, uncomfortable questions, right? Like I know sometimes like when we're kind of having these interviews and all these types of conversations, there can be some uncomfortable questions, but sometimes uncomfortable questions lead to good conversation and you really need to know. Like I would say I would rather ask an uncomfortable question than join the practice and find out in the first month that dang, that's not what I thought it was going to be. So, professionally, confidently, asking all of the questions, the easy ones, the hard ones, and everything in between. We know culture matters a lot. Knowing your first job is important, but it's not permanent. I also think that this is reasonable, right? Like sometimes people just put a lot of pressure on themselves to like make a forever home. And maybe it is your first position, but maybe it's not. And so nothing is permanent. And there will always be other opportunities. So, sometimes people I think get incredibly stressed about selecting. And just know if it doesn't work out for whatever reason, like that's okay, right? You're going to learn from that experience, and choose better next time. I would say absolutely choosing a place that invests in your growth and not just your production, right? So, what is their path for you? How are they going to strengthen you as a person, as a clinician? Like understanding that it's not all about money, right? It's about like, do they care about me and what matters to me as I'm growing as a provider? Um, and I think if you ask those right questions, like you're gonna find out who has kind of that in their, like for me, like it is not about practice numbers. For me, a lot of it, like I value and enjoy like being able to see the doctor that came in doing 3 or 4 cases and they're like predictably doing 7. Like that's really rewarding for me because I've helped them achieve a personal goal that they had. And so for me, that's really valuable and important. And so, is there somebody on the other side of this equation that really your growth matters to them in the long run as well? So I think, you know, is that the vibe you get from the practice you're talking to? Woo! So I just chit-chatted a lot of the things. But, I want to respect everybody's time. Are there questions, things that could use some clarity at this point? Or maybe
Do we,
them. Hmm.
if you, so I know you said you did your time in the Navy, then you did residency, and then you
Hmm.
came out and you started your own practice right away, correct?
Yes.
Was that a comfortable or an uncomfortable thing for you? Because so Dr. Kicker, it's the endodontist that I shadowed.
Yeah.
She owns her own practice now,
Yes.
but she worked in I think 2 other offices, neither of which were corporate. They were, well, I don't know, one of them might have been. It was like Charlotte Endodontics or something like that. So I think it was kind of quasi corporate. But she said she learned a lot over those experiences, which was like 4 years or so.
Hmm.
Um, but she owns her own, and she said she wouldn't have done it any other way because she didn't necessarily have to come right out dealing with the HR and the payroll and all that stuff. So she said she got to spend more time focusing on endo first. And then when she opened her own practice, the endo was like the escape. It was like the easy thing
Oh,
that
yeah.
she didn't have to think about as much. And now it's
Hmm.
more of running the business side of things. And so she said, obviously, there's 1,000 ways to skin the cat. You can do it however you want, but she
Hmm.
liked that way that she kind of took, and it just made sense to me because when I started in general dentistry in private practice, I didn't know anything. I mean, it took me a year to build speed and to get comfortable and kind of
Hmm.
comfortable in my own skin. So it made sense. But I
Hmm.
know a lot of people that do come out and start practices right away, or they buy a practice from someone that's phasing out, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question. I really for me, I didn't always know that I was going to own right out of residency. I actually wanted to associate. That was the intention. And I wanted to stay in Charleston. And at that moment in time, there just wasn't an associating opportunity. Most of the endodontists in the area were just single solo providers. They couldn't support another endodontist. And in having come off the military, my husband and I had moved 5 times, 4 times in 5 years. Like, so we were just ready to set roots. We wanted to start a family. So we wanted to stay in Charleston.
Mhm.
And so because there weren't any opportunities, it was like, well, you either move to get an associate position or you start your own. I mean, that was kind of the position I was faced with. And so I kind of joke that practice ownership was a little bit pushed on to me. It wasn't it wasn't the exact plan that I thought I had. And so yeah, it was very uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable. But, where I'm at now, it was the discomfort that led to enormous growth, right? So I'm the type of personality that like I embraced the discomfort. And I think, I do have a confident personality, so I think that that was part of it, and I was able to be successful. But are there hard learned lessons that I had to just figure out because it was me and I didn't have anyone to rely on? Sure. Do I think if you join a practice with as an associate and they are willing to teach you business and they are willing to kind of show you systems and all of that stuff? Absolutely. I think that's very, very valuable. So I can see both sides of the equations. I think most people are not suited for practice ownership immediately out of school.
Right.
I think there's so and certainly being on my side of things now and having had multiple associates work for me over the years, most are not ready at
Right.
all, right? Like they're clinically not efficient. They have no clue about insurance. They do not know how to manage. They do not know how to hire and fire and like, the stuff that keeps you up at night. Like they don't have a clue about that. And so if you're in a position as a new doctor where you're trying to gain your clinical efficiency and do you have to fire Susie, like that's a really stressful environment for most people. So,
So I guess my next question then to kind of piggyback off that would be if so I mean obviously I can't tell the future, I can't predict anything. But the goal would I would like to own my own practice at some point in time, or kind of the idea of owning your own practice. But what would you suggest during residency to even kind of gain some competency in that besides coming in and shadowing in different endodontic offices? Is there anything that you could do additionally?
I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but like align with a really strong mentor. So
Right.
I like honestly, like people who are super successful in what they're doing love to mentor and share what they know. So
Yeah.
like, I'm 10 years in private practice almost. So like I have a certain knowledge skill that someone in 2 years out in private practice don't have yet. And so you want to be aligning with someone who's been there and done that and learned the lesson already. And what can I learn from that person? And so shadowing is part of that. But just like somebody that and no nothing on resident faculty. But a lot of the times, like Dr. Cotter is unique in that he owns a private practice and he's a resident director. But most of the time, academia is like people who have been an academic director for 30 years.
Out of
Well,
touch.
you don't know what private practice is like. You do not know the stressors. You do not know day to day. And they tell residents like, oh, well, you should expect this or that. And like that's not who you need to align with if you're hoping to own a practice. You need to find a really strong practice owner who's going to be willing to teach you that. Um, I did a lot of self-learning too. Like I'm, pretty big reader, so I read a lot of business books. There's like a ton of, podcasts out there specific to dentistry. So like if you're serious about it, like you have to kind of create your own little learning pathway, focused on the business aspect of things because it's a lot and we're not prepared for it. And so you kind of have to start to navigate how am I going to learn these lessons on my own? The fastest way is a strong mentor, but there are a lot of books and resources and things that you can be doing as well. But yeah, I would say that's it.
Yeah, mentor. That was one of the most enticing things about speaking with Dr. Cotter was like,
Yes.
oh, this guy actually gets it. Like
Yeah.
he lives it on a day-to-day basis. He's bought and sold practices,
Yeah.
and he's not just the academia guy. He's
Yes.
not just the straight military, never really dealt with the private practice realm all that much
Right.
and all that. So it was I was like, I'm so fortunate that I got into the residency program, but I feel like I can learn a tremendous amount from him just by
Yes.
picking his brain.
Yeah, and he understands the value of bringing like outside perspectives in as well. Like, so I go down there, quarterly, and like other doctors in the area do too, so that you guys are being exposed to different perspectives
Yeah.
because, everybody looks at things a little bit differently, and the different perspectives is going to help you shape what yours will be when you
Yeah.
graduate. Yeah, good question.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I actually, in the same vein, I was like, I started private practice and I wish there had been a resource that I could have read that would have been there for me at the time that I opened up my doors. So I did happen to write that book. Um,
Oh, okay.
so the resource that I wished and prayed that had been there when I had opened. So happy to share that with you as well because
I'll,
it's the lessons that I have learned that I wish I had.
I'll
So,
invest it. I'll invest in that book.
well, I also have a copy for you if you're so inclined, happy to share.
Sure.
Okay, so real quick, let's talk about, this isn't the only thing to consider. Our next topic is going to be building a referral base as a new endodontist. So super important, this is a skill that has to be learned. And how do we build strong relationships? Even if you're joining a practice that has strong relationships, you will be a big part of this in any practice that you join. So we are going to talk about that next time. The date is going to be Thursday, July 16th at 8 o'clock. So you will get, of course, we send our correspondence, but if you want to mark your calendar for that, we will talk about that then. And then there's that book for you, Spencer.
All
So
right.
if you want to take a pic of the QR code, I'd be happy to get you a copy of the
Yeah.
book.
I just took a screenshot of
There you go. But
it.
yeah, so I'm happy you guys joined. I think these webinars are truly impactful. Like I said, with the oral boards tomorrow, I think we just ended up getting a tiny crew tonight, but we'll look forward to the next one. Jason, anything I can answer for you?
Well, I hesitate to ask questions because then
All
maybe it's probably something I missed earlier. So I'll go back and
right.
re and watch it, and and I'll be here for the next one. The next date should work for me, July 16th. I think that'll be great.
Awesome. Fair
Yeah.
enough. No worries. What about you, Amanda? Anything um that you feel like you want to add from your perspective or
Well, I was just gonna shout out one of the things we kind of started using in the practice is you. I don't know if it's pronounced Udemy or Udemy, but if you've ever heard of it or not heard of it, one of the things that we have some team members take is EQ training. But so it's essentially an online database. It doesn't cost anything to access it, and you can purchase these like mini courses. So if you like are interested in business, like I took my Six Sigma white belt on there. I've taken the emotional intelligence training. So that's also a tool that's out there, and like the courses are like $14.
Oh,
And you can search literally anything. Like you could be
yeah.
like, how do I do underwater basket weaving? And there will be a course for you. So I would say for sure that is a good tool as well if you're like if you need to build your own kind of learning trajectory, it'll help you do that.
How do you spell that?
It's Udemy.
Okay.
yeah, sweet. Because, when you're looking for the resources, sometimes you just don't know where to look, right?
Yeah.
So I love that. Thanks for that suggestion, Amanda.
Yeah.
All right, y'all, well, get to bed, get some sleep. We got teeth to save in the morning.
That's
Oh,
right.
I'm off for the next month, but I'm taking care of a baby right now, so there's
Mhm.
that.
Yes. Well, I guess I will be seeing you at MUSC shortly, but it was great to see you both and, email with any questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next one.